Fidelity tells us every year that we need $165,000 just to cover healthcare expenses in our retirement. You know, all the rest of the headlines are telling Gen Xers they need $1.6 million to retire comfortably. I mean, seriously, where am I supposed to get that kind of money? I mean, play the lottery every day, fingers crossed? Or claim I'm some long-lost relative of Taylor Swift, maybe? Or maybe I could apply as a contestant on Survivor. Yeah, who am I kidding? But reality check here. You know, when we see numbers that big, you know, our first reaction is usually something like, well, that's impossible. I'm so far behind. What's the point? You know, but here's what's interesting is retirement doesn't happen in lump sums. You know, it happens in monthly paychecks, just like our pre-retirement lives. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to shrink those overwhelming numbers into bite-sized pieces, amounts that you can actually plan for, you know, without feeling paralyzed, you know, or worse, thinking that, you know, Walter White in Breaking Bad had the right idea. Okay, the first point I want to make is why lump sums paralyze us the way they do. You know, $1 million may look impossible if you don't already have a huge portfolio or decades to get the job done. You know, many times lump sums, instead of motivating us, they discourage us and even defeat us. And the thing is that you never lived that way. You know, you built your life up to this point paycheck by paycheck. We need to think about our retirement as another big section of our lives that we'll be living out year after year. You know, not some big one and done event that we fund from the start with some huge lump sum. I mean, let's face it, we didn't set out at 25 with a big sack of money that was supposed to last us for the next 30 years. Well, Lisa Marie did, but that's different. But for the rest of us regular Gen Xers, let's break it down. You know, for example, ask yourself right now, have you already earned $1 million in your working lifetime? You know, some of us would answer, you know, I have no idea. But let's just say, as a Gen Xer, you know, in your 20s, you earned $20,000 a year. In your 30s, you earned $30,000 a year. In your 40s, $40,000 a year. You would have made $1 million by the time you reached age 52 and a half. You know, and those salary figures, they're not too off base, right? You know, and of course, you know, life doesn't work in nice big round numbers like that. But you've more than likely passed that $1 million threshold, or you're getting close to it. And there was probably no fanfare attached to it, because life doesn't usually operate in big lump sums. You've just been living month to month, paying the bills, building your life as you go. You know, retirement really works the same way. Okay, the second point I want to discuss is breaking down those healthcare numbers. You know, Fidelity puts their report out every year. Currently, they project someone at the age of 65 currently, they would need $165,000 just to cover their healthcare expenses for the next 30 years. You know, that sounds terrifying when you think about it like that. But $165,000 over the course of 30 years is $5,500 a year. You know, after Medicare premiums come out of that amount, it works out to about $283 a month. You know, $165,000, that can be paralyzing. But $283 a month? You know, that's a car payment. You know, we've all managed those. You know, and yes, that is an average number that Fidelity puts out. You know, some of us will have much higher medical costs, some lower. You know, I can give you a real life example. You know, my mom, currently, she's 85 years old. And even at that age, some years, she barely spends more than her Medicare Part B deductible, which I think currently it's around $257 a year. So yeah, if she makes it through a year without a serious fall, because there have been some of those in the past, she has hardly any extra medical expenses outside of those premiums and a few prescriptions. So when you hear that big fidelity figure, don't dwell on it. Just internally tell yourself that you'll cover it month by month for as long as you live. And the third point is the $1.6 million retirement myth. This is another large number that gets thrown around a lot. First it's we need $1 million, then we need 1.2 million, then it's 1.5 million. And I think to myself, well, you might as well have stopped at, the 1 million mark, because now it just all sounds the same anyway. My question is this. When they say I need $1.6 million to retire, are they talking about I need to cover that completely with my savings? Because if I started claiming my Social Security at age 62, over the course of 30 years, I would have collected around $509,000. And that's not even putting in any COLA increases. If I waited until full retirement age, which for me is 67, and I lived for another 30 years, I would collect around $724,000. Again, with no COLA increases. So with Social Security, I'm 1/3 to 1/2 of the way there to that 1.6 million. When you start looking at it through the lens of real life, month to month, year to year, retirement income actually consists of, a series of monthly paychecks that could come from Social Security, pensions if you have one, annuities if you choose to go that route, withdrawals from your retirement savings, and then also possibly a part-time job or rental income coming in. So the real question is do you have enough monthly income streams to cover your retirement expenses? And the fourth point is how to build your retirement paycheck. A recent survey, it showed that 93% of workers don't want to depend upon a pile of savings in retirement. They would rather have guaranteed income. And that's because retirement isn't about a lump sum. It's about replacing your paycheck. That's what our brains are trained, to think of. And the key is covering your essentials with reliable income, then building from there. And I know I can hear some of you saying, well, Social Security isn't reliable. And I am, talking from the assumption that yes, Social Security will be there for us. Whether it's in, 100% or reduced, I do believe that it will be there for us. So if we need to cover our basic essentials with a monthly paycheck and then build from there, let's break that down into some steps. Step one is know your basic lifestyle expenses, not a dream life, just the basics. Step two is add your guaranteed income, whether that's just Social Security or some of the other things I mentioned. And step three, fill the gap, from savings withdrawals, side gigs, part-time work. And step four, and this is very important, is to protect those savings. And you can do that by being proactive with your health, protecting against inflation if at all possible, and doing everything you can to prevent scams and fraud from infiltrating. And the last step is to continue to let your savings and your investments grow and earn through the years. Retirement can last 20 years, 30 years. That's plenty long enough that your money still needs to be compounding and working for you. And my fifth point is the mindset shift that Gen X really needs. Let's talk about those big lump sums. If they're unreachable for you, I don't want you to keep obsessing over them. Yes, save, and save as much as you can, Gen Xers, because there are a lot more people that regret not saving enough than those that regret saving too much. Because our savings can be a life raft that we depend on in our 60s and our 70s and beyond. But retirement is not the end of income coming in. It's just a reshuffling of income sources. As Gen Xers, we've already earned $1 million over the course of our lifetimes without seeing it in one big lump sum. So don't let a headline of 1.6 million make you feel powerless. Even with Social Security cuts, it's still contributing to the whole. Plus, we don't have to stop saving once we've retired. We don't have to stop earning once we've retired. And also our money doesn't have to stop working and earning after we retire either. We have years to live out the next chapters of our lives. So here's the takeaway. You don't need to have $1 million saved. You don't need to have $165,000 set aside just for health care. What you need is a way to pay your living expenses every single month, every single year for the rest of your life. And there are multiple ways to do that. Just saving $1 million is not the only way. Break it down, plan it out, and suddenly the steps, they don't seem so impossible to achieve. And what I profess here isn't a foolproof solution. It's not meant to be. Life doesn't work that way. What I want to do is give you another way of thinking about retirement and saving for retirement. And if this gave you a new way of looking at planning for your future, then please hit the like button and share it so other Gen Xers can see it as well. And don't forget to subscribe for realistic strategies to make retirement doable instead of daunting. I have a great video for you to watch next. Why it's the best time and worst time for Gen X to build wealth. I talk about 5 reasons that are holding us back and 5 reasons to capitalize on. I'll link it right here. And the next time you see those big numbers shouting at you, just respond back and say, I got this. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great week. Bye.